Clara Morgan had always been the kind of woman who looked like she had everything figured out. Her coworkers in San Francisco admired her calm voice, her neat office desk, her always on-time habits. But when she walked home in the evenings, she often felt something hollow inside, something quiet and lonely that she couldn't explain. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was more like a question that kept echoing in her heart. Did I make the right choices? Years ago, when she was still in college in Seattle, she had been in love with a man named Ethan Hayes. Ethan wasn't the kind of person who turned heads in a crowd. He was simple, kind, with soft brown eyes and hands that always felt warm. He studied architecture, always sketching buildings on napkins and dreaming of designing homes that made people feel safe. That was Ethan's safety, stability, and peace. He was the kind of man who made you believe in forever. Back then, Clara had thought that was enough. She loved how steady he was, how he made her tea when she studied late, how he listened more than he spoke. He had planned a small house near the water, a golden retriever, Sunday mornings reading the newspaper together. It all sounded perfect. Yet something deep in her heart whispered that she was meant for more. Not more money or luxury, but something different. She didn't know what that was, but she felt it every time she looked at the horizon and imagined life beyond the quiet streets of Seattle. Ethan could feel her drifting, even when she didn't say a word. He'd ask her if she was happy, and she'd smile and say, "Of course." But her eyes would wander to the city skyline, to the travelers at the train station, to the people who looked like they were on their way somewhere. She wanted to go somewhere too, but she didn't know where. The day it ended wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no anger. It was a rainy morning, the kind Seattle was famous for. Ethan had made her coffee, just like always, and she was standing by the window, watching the drops slide down the glass. She turned to him and said softly, "I think I need to leave for a while." He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at her, as if memorizing the shape of her face, the sound of her voice. Then he nodded and said, "I always knew this day would come." Clara wanted him to argue, to tell her to stay, to make it harder to go. But he didn't. Ethan had always been gentle. And maybe that was part of why she had to leave, because she needed a storm. Not calm seas. She packed her bags that afternoon. He helped her, even though she could tell it hurt him. When she closed the suitcase, she saw him staring at it, his hands slightly trembling. She walked over, kissed his cheek, and said, "You've been everything good in my life." He smiled sadly. "Then why are you leaving?" Clara had no answer. She just whispered, "Because I need to find who I am when I'm not with you." When she stepped into the cab, she looked back once. Ethan stood on the porch, his gray sweater damp from the rain. He didn't wave. He just stood there, watching. As the cab disappeared down the street, in the years that followed, Clara built a life that looked exciting from the outside. She got a marketing job in Los Angeles, started wearing bright clothes, went to rooftop parties, met new people every weekend. But on quiet nights, when the city lights flickered outside her window, she still thought of Ethan. She remembered his slow laugh, his soft goodbyes, the warmth that used to fill her small Seattle apartment. Sometimes she wondered if she had made a mistake. But then she'd tell herself that mistakes were part of living, that maybe she needed to lose something steady to discover something real. She convinced herself that love was supposed to be wild and breathtaking, not quiet and predictable. Still, her heart had a way of returning to the memory of that quiet morning, the sound of rain, and the man who let her go without a single complaint. Clara started writing letters to him, letters she never sent. In them, she told him about her new city, her work, the people she met. She also told him about the silence she sometimes felt even in the middle of laughter. She wrote about how strange it was to get everything she thought she wanted, only to realize it didn't fill her the way she hoped it would, once. She wrote, "You gave me peace when I didn't know how to appreciate it. Maybe I had to lose it to understand its worth." Then she folded the letter and tucked it into a box under her bed with the others. Time moved fast. Her friends started getting married, buying homes, having kids. Clara smiled at their happiness, but she couldn't help wondering why her heart still felt restless. Every new city, every new job, every new face, they all gave her something, but none gave her what Ethan did. a feeling of belonging. One evening, after a long day at work, Clara stopped by a coffee shop near her apartment. The smell of roasted beans and soft jazz music in the background brought back a rush of memories. She ordered a cappuccino and sat by the window. Outside, the rain had started again, not heavy, just a soft drizzle, enough to make the city glow. As she sipped her coffee, she thought about how life had carried her so far from that morning in Seattle. Yet somehow, part of her was still standing in that doorway. Watching him fade into the rain, she realized that Ethan wasn't just her past. He was a piece of her that never left. He represented the version of love she had walked away from, quiet, safe, unconditional. And though she had gone searching for adventure and passion, some small part of her still longed for the warmth of that ordinary morning, the comfort of someone who understood her without words. That night, she went home and looked through the letters again. She opened the first one she ever wrote and smiled faintly. It said, "I'm chasing something, but I don't know what it looks like yet. Maybe I'll know when I find it. Or maybe it was you all along." She placed it back in the box, turned off the light, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The city outside was noisy, alive, moving, but her thoughts were still, drifting back to a time when love was simple and her heart hadn't learned to run, and as sleep slowly found her. She whispered into the quiet, "Maybe one day I'll understand why I had to leave the one who loved me the most." She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of her journey, a story that would take her through different phases, different kinds of love, until she finally understood what her heart had been searching for all along. After leaving Seattle, Clara Morgan thought she was done with the past. She wanted to start fresh, new city, new people, new version of herself. Los Angeles felt like the right place for that. It was loud, bright, and always moving. No one asked where you came from. They only cared about where you were going. For the first time, Clara felt free. She rented a small apartment near the beach. The air smelled like salt and sunlight, and every evening she'd walk along the shore just to feel the wind against her face. She told herself she wasn't looking for love. She'd had her quiet love with Ethan, the one that felt like safety. Now she wanted something different, something that made her heart race again. That's when she met Liam Carter. It happened at a gallery opening downtown. She had gone with a coworker who left early, leaving Clara alone pretending to study the paintings. Liam noticed her standing there, holding a half-empty glass of wine, staring at a photograph of waves crashing against rocks. "You like it?" he asked, stepping beside her. "It feels alive," she said without looking at him. He smiled. "Good answer." "I took it. That was how it started. Simple, effortless, like two people meeting at the exact right moment." Liam was a freelance photographer, full of energy and stories. He talked about light, color, and the way time freezes in a picture. Clara listened, fascinated. He made the world sound poetic, even the small things. They started seeing each other often. Their dates were never planned. Sometimes he'd call her at midnight saying, "Come outside. I want to show you something." And they'd drive to the hills just to watch the city lights. Other times they'd spend an entire Sunday lying on the floor, listening to music and talking about dreams. Liam lived like tomorrow didn't exist. With him, Clara laughed again, not polite, quiet laughter, but the kind that comes from deep inside. He took her out of her routines. They drove up the coast, chasing sunsets. He'd pull over anywhere just to take a photo of the sky. She used to tease him about it, but secretly she loved it. The way he noticed beauty in everything. One night, sitting on the roof of his apartment, he told her, "You know what I like about you? You still believe there's something more out there?" She smiled. "Isn't that what you believe too?" He shrugged. "Maybe, but I think you believe it harder than I do." Their love wasn't peaceful like it had been with Ethan. It was full of fire arguments that ended with apologies. Long silences followed by laughter. Liam wasn't afraid to challenge her, and Clara loved that. He made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. But there was another side to him, restless, unpredictable. He could disappear for days on photography trips without a single text. When he came back, he'd kiss her like nothing happened. At first, she accepted it. She told herself this was what passion looked like: unpredictable, wild, free. But slowly, it started to hurt. Clara wanted to be part of his world, not just someone waiting for him to return. She wanted to build something real, something that didn't vanish with the next sunrise. But Liam lived in moments, not plans. One evening, she found him sitting at his desk, packing his camera bag. "Another trip?" she asked. He looked up. "Paris? Just for a few months." Her heart sank. Months. He smiled gently. "I got an opportunity to shoot for a travel magazine. It's what I've always wanted. And what about us?" He walked over, took her hand, and said softly, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. But you know I can't stay still, Clara. You deserve someone who can." She tried to stay calm, but her voice trembled. "I don't want someone else, Liam. I want you." He touched her cheek. "Then keep me in your heart. That's where I'll always be." The next morning, he was gone. No dramatic goodbye, just a note on the counter that said, "Don't stop dreaming." For weeks, Clara felt lost. Every corner of the apartment reminded her of him: the photos on the wall, camera lens on the table, even the faint smell of his cologne. She went to work, smiled when people talked to her, and tried to act like everything was fine. But at night, she'd sit by the window and scroll through his photography page, seeing new posts from Paris, him standing by the Seine, laughing, surrounded by strangers. He looked happy. She wanted to be angry, but she couldn't. She knew this was who he was, a man chasing horizons. It's never meant to stay in one place. One rainy evening, she walked to the beach. The sky was gray and the water looked endless. She stood there for a long time, letting the wind hit her face, remembering his words: "You deserve someone who can stay." That night, she realized something important. Liam had given her the dream she was searching for, not through promises, but through how he lived. He showed her that love didn't always have to end in forever. Sometimes it was meant to wake you up, to teach you how to feel again. Clara began to write again. Short journal entries about the moments she didn't want to forget. She wrote about the rooftop nights, the laughter, the adventures. She wrote about how love can be both beautiful and heartbreaking, and how both are sometimes necessary. Months passed. Liam sent her one postcard, a picture of the Eiffel Tower with 3 words written on the back: "Keep chasing light." She smiled when she read it, knowing he still thought of her, even if from a distance. By the time summer came, Clara had stopped checking his social media. She started to find peace in small things again: her morning walks, her work, the quiet hum of city life. She still missed him sometimes, but it didn't hurt the same way anymore. The pain had softened into gratitude. She understood now. Ethan had shown her stability. Liam had shown her freedom. Both had loved her in their own ways, and both had taught her something she couldn't have learned otherwise. One evening, while sorting through her desk, she found a photo Liam had taken of her sitting on the beach, hair blowing in the wind, smiling at something unseen. She framed it and placed it on her nightstand. It was a reminder of a time when she was brave enough to follow her heart, even when it led her to heartbreak. Because sometimes the dream is worth the fall. Clara went to bed that night feeling lighter. She whispered to herself, "Thank you, Liam," and closed her eyes. The next morning, sunlight poured through her window, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel the need to look back. She was ready for whatever came next, even if she didn't know what it was yet. Years had passed since Liam. Time had smoothed the edges of Clara's heartbreak. But it had also left her quieter, wiser, and a little more careful with her heart. She had moved again, this time to Chicago, a city that seemed to balance her need for both peace and purpose. The wind was sharp, the winters cold, but there was something about the city's rhythm that made her feel grounded. She wasn't chasing anything anymore. She just wanted to build a life that felt steady. Clara worked as a creative director at a small design firm. Her coworkers saw her as calm, composed, dependable, a woman who never missed deadlines and never lost her temper. What they didn't see was how often she still thought about love. Not the wild, reckless kind Liam gave her, and not the soft, predictable kind Ethan offered. Something in between. Something real. That was when she met Daniel. He joined her office as a project manager. quiet and observant. Daniel had warm gray eyes and a deep, steady voice. He wasn't the kind of man who drew attention, but people trusted him instantly. Clara did too. Their friendship began simply coffee breaks, shared jokes during long meetings. Walking out of the office together when everyone else had gone home, he asked about her ideas, her travels, her favorite books. He listened carefully, never interrupting, never rushing to fill the silence. Over time, their bond deepened. He didn't chase her like Liam had. He waited for her to come closer on her own, and slowly she did. There was something peaceful about being with him. They'd spend evenings walking by Lake Michigan, talking about work, life, and the small things that made them happy. He once told her, "I think the best kind of love is the one that doesn't scare you." She smiled and said softly, "Maybe I've had enough of the kind that does." Daniel understood her pace. He never pushed. When she hesitated to open up about her past, he said, "You don't owe me your history, Clara. Just your honesty when you're ready." Was kindness like that, simple and patient, that made her start believing in love again. Months turned into years. They started spending weekends together, cooking dinner, reading on the couch, watching the city lights from her balcony. It wasn't the kind of romance filled with grand gestures or endless surprises. It was gentle and familiar, like coming home after a long journey. One snowy evening, Daniel brought her a small box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a locket. "It's empty," he said with a shy smile, "because I want you to fill it with something that matters to you." Clara touched the locket and felt her eyes sting with tears. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of what love could mean. She was ready to stay. Life with Daniel was calm and beautiful. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, old memories would sneak back. When she heard a certain song or saw a photograph online, she'd think of Liam's laughter or Ethan's kindness. Not with longing, but with an ache of nostalgia, a reminder of the woman she used to be. She never told Daniel about these thoughts. She didn't want him to feel like he was competing with ghosts. One night, during a heavy snowfall, Clara was organizing her drawer when she found an old photo one Liam had taken of her by the beach. She froze. The image brought back a flood of emotions she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about wanting him back. It was about remembering who she had been when she was with him. Fearless, curious, alive. Daniel walked in quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He noticed the photo in her hand but didn't say anything. After a moment, he asked gently, "That's him, isn't it?" Clara nodded slowly. "Yes. From a long time ago." He smiled sadly. "You don't have to hide your past from me. I know I'm not the first man who's loved you." She looked at him, surprised by his calmness. "Doesn't that bother you?" He shook his head. "It means you've lived. It means you know how to love." His answer stayed with her. That night, after he fell asleep, Clara lay awake thinking about all the versions of herself she had been. The girl who wanted safety. The woman who chased dreams, and now the one who had finally found peace. Over the next few years, life settled into a quiet rhythm. She and Daniel traveled, hosted dinners, and built a home filled with laughter and books. He proposed one evening during a walk along the lake. The ring was simple, elegant, just like him. Clara said yes, not out of excitement, but with a calm certainty that felt right. But love, she learned, isn't always about certainty. A few months before the wedding, Daniel was offered a new job in New York, one that required him to move immediately. He wanted her to come with him, but she hesitated. Chicago had become her home, her place of peace. She had worked hard to build her independence again. And the thought of starting over scared her. They tried long distance for a while. Calls every night, visits once a month. But slowly, the distance started to show. Conversations grew shorter, silence stretched longer. One night, Daniel said softly, "Maybe this isn't our time, Clara." She didn't argue. She understood. Some loves aren't meant to end in heartbreak. They just fade quietly, leaving behind respect instead of pain. After they parted, Clara stayed in Chicago. The apartment felt emptier, but she didn't feel broken this time. She had loved and lost before. But now she knew loss didn't mean failure. It meant growth. She started volunteering at a local art center teaching design to students. Helping others find their creativity reminded her of what she loved most, connecting through stories, colors, and emotions. One afternoon, as she watched her students laughing and painting, she realized something. Every man she had loved, Ethan, Liam, Daniel, had given her something precious. Ethan had shown her tenderness, Liam had shown her passion, and Daniel had shown her patience. Each had helped her become the woman she was now. That night, she walked along the snowy streets, her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. She passed by a coffee shop and saw couples sitting inside, holding hands, smiling softly. For the first time, she didn't feel envy. She felt peace. When she got home, she opened the locket Daniel had given her years ago. It was still empty. She placed inside it a small folded piece of paper that said, "For every version of me." Clara sat by the window, watching the snow fall. Life had given her many kinds of love, some lasting, some fleeting, but each one had shaped her heart in ways she would never trade. She finally understood that not all love stories are about finding someone to stay. Some are about finding yourself through the ones who don't. She smiled softly, whispering, "Thank you, all of you," and felt a quiet warmth fill her chest outside. The snow kept falling, gentle, endless, and full of promise. By the time Clara Morgan turned 40, her life had become quiet again. Not lonely, just peaceful. Chicago had been her home for almost a decade, but lately, the city noise began to feel heavy. She'd built a successful career surrounded by colleagues who admired her and students who looked up to her. Yet sometimes, in the middle of her busy days, she would pause and feel a deep stillness inside, the kind that whispered, "It's time to slow down." One morning, she packed a few clothes, her journal, and the old silver locket Daniel had given her. She rented a small cabin on the coast of Maine, right by the ocean. It was a place she'd only seen in magazines. Cliffs covered in pine trees, fog rolling over the water, gulls flying low against the waves. She told no one where she was going. She just left. The first few days felt strange. There was no phone service most of the time, no meetings, no noise, only the sound of waves crashing and wind moving through the trees. At first, Clara kept checking her phone out of habit, scrolling through messages that weren't there. But soon she stopped. The silence started to feel like company instead of emptiness. She spent her mornings walking along the shore, collecting shells, writing in her journal, and letting the cold air wake her up. In the afternoons, she'd sit on the porch with a blanket and a cup of tea, watching the sea change colors, blue, then gray, then gold. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about the past or planning the future. She was just being Dot. It was there, in that solitude, that she began to see her life more clearly. She thought about Ethan, his quiet love, his gentle patience. She thought about Liam, his wild energy, his endless passion. She thought about Daniel, his kindness, his steady heart. Each of them had given her something she had needed at that time. And she realized she had been looking for pieces of herself in all of them. Ethan had taught her what stability felt like. Liam had shown her what it meant to feel alive. Daniel had reminded her what peace could be. But now she was learning something none of them could teach her: how to be whole on her own. One rainy evening, Clara lit a fire in the cabin and sat by the window, watching droplets slide down the glass. She opened her journal and began to write. "I wanted all four: love, adventure, safety, and freedom. I spent years searching for them in others. But maybe I was supposed to find them in myself." She wrote for hours that night, every memory flowing out like water: the mornings with Ethan, the nights with Liam, the calm days with Daniel. But as she wrote, she noticed something. Her words weren't filled with regret. They were filled with gratitude. Every heartbreak, every goodbye, every moment of joy, they had all shaped her into the woman she had become. The next morning, the sun finally came out after days of rain. The ocean sparkled and the air smelled fresh and new. Clara made breakfast, opened the windows, and laughed softly to herself. She realized she hadn't laughed like that in a long time, not because of anyone else, but simply because she felt light. Later that day, she took a long walk along the cliffs. She stopped at a spot where the land curved out over the water and closed her eyes. The wind brushed through her hair and the sound of waves filled the silence. In that moment, she didn't feel like someone who had lost 3 loves. She felt like someone who had lived 3 lifetimes. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I was never meant to end up with one person. Maybe I was meant to meet all of them so I could finally meet me." That evening, as the sky turned orange and pink, she opened her locket and placed inside it a tiny seashell she had picked up that morning. It wasn't a grand symbol or a romantic token. It was simple, but it represented something true. A reminder that love, in all its forms, had led her here, to peace. Days turned into weeks. Clara started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. Her small cabin slowly filled with canvases. The sea at dawn, the forest in fog, her own reflection in the glass. She wasn't painting for anyone else, not to sell or to impress. She painted because it made her feel alive. One afternoon, while cleaning the cabin, she found a box of old letters she had written years ago, letters she never sent. They were to Ethan. She opened the first one and smiled softly. Her words felt young, uncertain, full of longing. She read each one until the sun went down. Then she took the box outside and placed it in a small fire pit. The papers curled and turned to ash, rising into the sky like tiny pieces of the past floating away. She didn't cry. She just watched the smoke drift out over the water and said quietly, "Thank you." The following morning, as she sat by the window with her tea, her phone buzzed for the first time in weeks. The screen showed a name she hadn't seen in years, Ethan. For a moment, she just stared at it. Her heart didn't race like it once would have. Instead, she smiled a calm, knowing smile. She answered, "Clara." His voice was the same, soft, warm. "Hi, Ethan," she said. Her voice steady. "I heard you moved away for a while," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." She looked out at the ocean and said, "I'm more than okay. I think I finally found what I was looking for." He paused, then said gently, "I'm glad. You deserve that." When the call ended, Clara sat there for a while, the phone resting in her hand. It didn't feel like a new beginning or a second chance. It felt like closure, the quiet, peaceful kind that doesn't hurt anymore. That evening, she wrote her final journal entry. "I wanted all 4: love, adventure, safety, and freedom. I had them all, just not all at once. And that's okay. Because every piece of love I gave came back to me in a different form. Strength, wisdom, peace." She placed the journal beside her bed, turned off the lamp and listened to the sound of the waves. Outside, the stars shimmered over the dark ocean. Inside, Clara Morgan finally rested, not because her story had ended, but because she no longer needed to chase the ending. She had found the greatest love of all, the love of her own life.